Okay, thank you very much for being here so early. Is it me? Do I need to do something?
You can select.
I don't know how to hide it.
Okay, there we go. Great. So thank you very much for being here. If any of you were at the ASSC, you may have noticed that people in the community are starting to discuss consciousness in structural terms. And one way to approach the topic of explaining consciousness in a structural way is to understand your experience right now as a structure of a lot of contents that are related to each other. So right now you're having an experience of some images, some colors, some sounds, some taste maybe of the coffee. All these things are in your experience right now. And one attempt is to describe it as a phenomenal structure. IIT, Integrated Information Theory, is a theory of consciousness that has been developed for the past 30 years and tries to account for consciousness in structural terms by starting from experience itself. So on the left side, you see a snapshot of experience when you open your eyes. You're lying down on the bed, you see your hands holding a book, and you can describe the structure of this experience, the fact that there are some spatial features, temporal features, sensory features, and IIT tries to describe that experience and then ask what is the physical correspondent, what is the contribution of the substrate of consciousness that really accounts for the fact that I am seeing exactly what I'm seeing and feeling exactly what I'm feeling. So the IIT method usually is to unfold, we say, the cause-effect power of the substrate of consciousness to establish an explanatory identity with the experience. But when we're talking about a specific content of experience, for instance, the fact that right now you're experiencing the taste of coffee, well, that will just be a subset of your experience that we have to focus on. And today, I would like to start more humbly, not from something like pain or color, but just by addressing the fact that your visual experience is characterized by extendedness. So there are some modalities such as vision and somatosensory experience, like the feeling of having an extended body that have space as a feature. Other modalities such as olfaction arguably do not. So the IIT method is to focus on a phenomenal structure of a content of experience, in this case, visual space, and then ask the question, what is the subset of the whole substrate of consciousness that contributes this specific aspect to your experience? The first case of the extendedness of space has been approached with the tools of IIT by unfolding simple grids that are little systems of units with bidirectional connections. And this his work has been published in 2019 by Andrew Hahn and Giulio Tononi. I will, roughly speaking, just like present an overview of this work and then explain how this connects to explain the experience of time. Of course, space is only one of the aspects of experience, of its content. In the IIT agenda, we would like to approach other contents of experience, such as the experience of the flow of time, the fact that you usually don't only see an extended canvas in front of your eyes and you don't only see colors and shapes like little local low-level features that fill in the screen like pixels, but you also experience objects. So all these things that are contents of experience in IIT should correspond to substructures of the whole cause-effect structure that you can unfold from the full substrate of consciousness. So when we focus only on the extendedness of visual space, first, in the IIT method, we have to start by characterizing what it is like to experience visual space, and in particular, the fact that it is extended. So the first thing that is important to say is that you are seeing a dark screen right now. There's nothing on the screen, and yet you are having a very rich experience of this vast expanse that is in front of your eyes, but if you close your eyes, it will still be there. And actually, it takes quite a lot for you and for the substrate of consciousness to contribute this specific content of experience. And of course, the canvas could be red, it could be green. That doesn't really matter. The space, it's still there. You're seeing the screen as extended, even if there's nothing on the screen. Similarly, you could see faces, houses, objects. It doesn't really matter if there are objects or not. Your visual experience is usually characterized by an extendedness of a canvas in front of your eyes. So the first claim of IIT is that experience is structured and there are components to the experience. So I can focus my attention on the auditory components and the visual components, but within the visual experience, I can also focus my attention on the fact that when I see a canvas, I am actually seeing a lot of little regions that I could focus my attention on. And even when all these regions that I just highlighted are gone completely dark, they're kind of still there because I'm still seeing this thing as extended, right? I don't lose the space whenever it's only dark. So the first claim of IIT is that there must be a lot of components that compose your experience, even of just a blank screen. And one intuition pump is that if I take, this simple example of a white strip between these two bright dots, you must be seeing something there where the white strip is, right? And the fact that now there is no white strip anymore, but there's just like darkness, doesn't mean that there's no space in there. I could just like with a little, just intuition pump, I could remove the space between these two white dots. And if I really were able to remove the space that you experience between them, well, then they wouldn't be at a distance anymore. They would touch each other, right? So this is just to appreciate the fact that whenever we are seeing space, there is a lot going on there. We're actually experiencing something. The second point that is important, though, is that it's not enough for us to experience components of experience, like in this case, experiencing spots or locations, regions on a screen. They must be related in exactly the right way. Like, for instance, I can imagine all the possible spots, all the possible regions that compose this white strip, but the fact that they include each other, they are close to each other exactly in this way, is what makes that white strip feel extended in exactly this way. If I were to, so to speak, take all these components and unrelate them, in this case, in the space outside of that strip, I would have lost the spatial properties of that strip. Okay. So this is a very long story, and I invite you to consult the paper called Why Space Feels the Way It Does by Andrew Horn and Giulio Tononi, where they go through the phenomenological analysis of what it feels like to experience extendedness in the visual field. And then they characterize 4 properties that seem fundamental for us to experience something as extended. This property might sound less intuitive to you, but in the paper, they argue that actually your visual experience requires these fundamental properties to feel extended, just like any other experience of an extended content. And these 4 fundamental properties are reflexivity, inclusion, connection, and fusion. So very briefly, the idea is that reflexivity is the characteristic of space where its regions point to themselves. They don't go anywhere else, so to speak. Space is very stable. And this is in contrast, you can think of a moment in time that flows away from you. And for something to be a region of space, it must be the case that it is included by another region of space. So for every spot that you can highlight with your attention in the visual field, if your visual field is extended, you can always find a spot that includes it. Otherwise, you would have basically this spot would be the entire visual field. And similarly, every spot also must include other spots. Otherwise, you couldn't be able to resolve a spot as a region of space. It would just be a point. Another property of spatial extendedness is connection. So every spot partially overlaps at least one other spot, and their overlaps is also a spot. And intuitively, again, in order for me to experience the canvas of the visual field as extended, it must be the case that I must be able to see that regions overlap each other, sometimes partially, sometimes fully. I have to be able to say who overlaps who and who's closer to who and who's further away from who. So this is an essential property of spatial experience. And then the last property is fusion. The idea that every time two spots overlap partially, then their union is also a spot. Okay, so far I've said that the idea is that there is something it is like to have a spatial experience, irrespective of colors, objects, any sensory stimulus. This is as qualitative as seeing colors. There must be a reason why my visual field feels extended but my gustatory field doesn't feel extended. So I have to explain the extendedness of visual experience. The second point is that to experience space, we must be experiencing countless spots and regions that I can resolve, and they must relate in exactly the right way. Among all the ways in which they relate, four seem to be more fundamental, which are these four. So now let's zoom out again and ask the question, if this is a correct, true, veridical characterization of visual experience and its extendedness, and if these are properties that indeed characterize the phenomenology of visual experience, can we now find something in the physical substrate of consciousness that accounts for the fact that visual experience feels this way? Can we find some correspondent properties on the physical side of things? And so here, the idea of IIT is that whatever corresponds to not only the level of consciousness, but also the content of consciousness is the way in which mechanisms in the substrate of consciousness causally constrain each other. And IIT measures the way in which mechanisms causally constrain each other by computing their cause-effect power. This is what we call a cause-effect structure that is composed of distinctions, meaning each mechanism, let's say a neuron, a population of neurons, or maybe a mini column is specifying information as a mechanism about some other neurons or mini columns. And then relations, meaning different mechanisms can agree or disagree about their the information that they specify about causes and effects within the system. So I'm not going to say how we compute integrated information and distinctions and relations, but I invite you to consult the IIT 4.0 paper that has been published in 2023, where we outline the whole formalism, and we have examples of how you compute these things. And also, I will say at the end that we recently went live with an IIT wiki, which has some tutorials and walkthroughs of the mathematics and shows you how to compute all these quantities and all these cause-effect structures in very simple systems. So for now, what I want to point your attention to is that, so if we take a substrate, we can unfold its cause-effect structure. But of course, we have to ask ourselves, which is the right substrate that we want to unfold if we want to explain visual experience, and in particular, if we want to account for the fact that it feels extended. And we know that, of course, visual cortex is very relevant for visual experience, and we can get inspiration from the architecture of visual cortex that is known to be mostly grids of units connected via nearest neighbor connections. There is no preferential direction. It's probably stacks of grids with lattice-like architecture stacked on top of each other. So what Andrew Hahn and Giulio Tononi did for this paper in particular was to simplify even further this architecture and just take a grid of 7 nodes, a 1D grid with lateral connections, and unfold it and see whether we can recover some of the properties that are fundamental for the extendedness of visual space. So you can look at the distinctions in this case, and they follow a pattern. Every distinction specifies a cause and an effect over the same elements. So I take distinction B, C, D, E. It specifies a cause in red over CD and an effect in green over CD as well. And this pattern is repeated throughout the structure. So here I zoom in on just 4 distinctions. Again, causes are in red and effects are in green. And I would like to ask the question, can I recover the fundamental properties of spatial extendedness in the pattern of distinctions and relations in the cause-effect structure? And I can briefly show that if I take one by one these properties, reflexivity can be explained as the fact that every distinction overlaps with itself, so specifies a cause and an effect that overlap over the same units. Every distinction in the cause effect structure also satisfies inclusion, meaning just like every spot is included by a bigger spot, every distinction is included by a bigger distinction. So if I take the units in the cause and effect purviews of the distinction, there's always a distinction that has causes and effects that are a superset of those units. Similarly, just like every spot is included by another spot, every distinction, it includes another spot, every distinction includes other distinctions. Just like every spot partially overlaps with another spot, and their overlap is also a spot. This is also true for distinctions, and similarly for fusion. Every time two spots overlap, they fuse into a bigger spot. In this case, every time two distinctions overlap, there's a distinction that is the fusion of the two. So after this brief overview of how to find these properties in the distinctions and relations that we find in a cause effect structure, of course, we want to ask the question, this is just for spots and just for distinctions in the cause effect structure, but my experience of space applies throughout the visual field. Do I find that these properties apply throughout the cause effect structure? And the answer is yes. If we take non-directed grids, this pattern of distinctions and their relations according to reflexivity, inclusion, connection, and fusion apply throughout the structure. So starting from these fundamental properties, we can also go to some derived properties that are actually the ones that I use when I describe phenomenology of space more in sort of like lay terms. So we can then define what it feels like for a spot to be located somewhere, or to be included in another region, or to be at a distance from some other spot. And again, in the paper, these properties are derived properties that can be defined rigorously in terms of cause effect power based on these fundamental properties. Let's skip this. I want to say that this has, of course, some applications. We know that in the brain, there are some regions that perform spatial functions, but some of these regions perform these spatial functions consciously and some unconsciously, especially the subcortical regions tend to be useful to perform things like eye fixation unconsciously. And in this paper that we published in 2021, called Of Maps and Grids, we built two systems that are functionally equivalent, but one of them has actually lateral connections with distinctions and relations that specify the relevant properties of spatial extendedness, and the other one doesn't. So in this case, the prediction of it is that you can perform the same function, but if the substrate is the right one, then you also have an associated experience of spatial qualities. But if you don't have the right architecture, you can still perform the same function, but this does not correspond to conscious experience. Everything that I've said for space, we can just do for time. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's still work in progress, but we are probably less than a month away from uploading a paper on archive. And this is going to be authored by Renzo Mulatti, myself, and Giulio Tononi. So I just invite you to wait and keep an eye on this. But the idea is basically the same. We start by describing the phenomenology of time. In this case, we focus not on the extendedness of the visual field, but on the fact that time feels extended because time, the experience of the present is not instantaneous. Your experience of the present feels like you are experiencing phonemes one at a time, and yet every word is still present as a whole in your experience. And this has been called the specious present by William James and other psychophysicists and psychologists. So this is one target characterization of phenomenology we want to account for. And of course, we don't really know what the substrate, physical substrate in the brain of the experience of time is, but here we can actually make predictions. It looks like if we unfold directed grids, so grids that have a preferential connection in one direction, then we can retrieve patterns of distinctions and relations that account for the directedness of time and for the fact that moments can include each other in a directed way, they can overlap in a directed way, and they can fuse in a directed way. So the prediction is, well, maybe that's what we should look for when we look at the substrate of time in the brain. There are interesting similarities and differences between space and time that you can find in the paper. And I would just like to conclude by saying that maybe one take-home message is, even though the details of these explanations are not right, I think it is important to see that a theory like IIT is trying to build an explanation of contents of consciousness based on the same template. And as you can see, the idea is that there are some architectures that are going to be responsible for some specific modes of experience. So non-directed grids, like the ones found in posterior cortex, can be unfolded in extensions, and in this case, they can account for the extendedness of space. It can be visual space or bodily space. Directed grids can be unfolded to contribute something directed to the experience of different modalities. For instance, the experience of the flow of time in audition, or the experience of motion in vision. And this is work that has already been done. And then in the future, there are other hypotheses. For instance, in the ventral stream of visual cortex, we know that there is convergent architecture, so we can have rooted trees, and the idea is this can account for not only the fact that we experience visual low-level features, but we experience objects. And I've been involved in this project for almost 5 years now. We're not ready yet, but that is definitely in the purview of the theory. And then finally, we would like to do the same type of analysis for types of substrate that we call cliques, and this could contribute to our experience, local qualities such as color, sound, smells, maybe even pain, but that is a little bit like in the future. I want to point you to the IIT wiki. Everything that I said will eventually be there, and if you want to learn more about IIT, you can go to www.iit.wiki. You can also give us feedback on questions you have and things that you think are not clear. So please, if you want to learn more about the mathematics, there's also PyPhi Colab tutorials that run the PyPhi software that Wim Maynor, who is in the room, wrote. That is the one that we use to do all the IIT magical computations. So this is a great resource to learn about IIT. And that's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo. And is there other questions?
So I know you mentioned it in your basically last slide before the wiki, and you said, well, this is kind of future work, but I'd like to hear, like, some of your speculations. Let me put it that way. So the account of visual experience that you gave is, by its own definition, mostly about like visual experience. So it is somehow like very topology-like, very topological in some sense. What about like, color experience, sound experience? How, like, as I said, like, any conjecture you might have, like, I'd be happy to hear if there are already some, speculations for other spaces.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me just check that I understood the question. It seems like space and maybe even time can be a content of experience that can be accounted for structurally, because in a sense they are structured. You have topologies of space, but there are some other contents of experience like color and maybe pain, taste, that seem to be more sort of atomic qualities. There's really not a lot of structure inside the redness of red. Maybe there is structure between red and green, red and blue, red and orange, but not within the quality of red. So we've been thinking about this a lot. And there are two things I want to say. So the first one, it would be really interesting to actually reflect on how many contents of experience can be accounted for structurally, and where do we hit these apparent atoms of experience that are non-structured. And I do believe that most of these things we talk about, like when I see an object, I see a face, it is actually structured, like it has components, it has a spatial extendedness, there are some low-level features, there are some shapes. So that seems to be amenable to a structural account. But maybe emotions, thoughts, complex contents of experience, I think we can account them structurally. But then when we get to color and pain, well, now there are two options here. One is that maybe there are some contents of experience that are just not structured. And then in that case, we can try to, account for them and maybe we will fail. But there is another option that is very interesting. And by the way, at the SSC, it was also contemplated by Andrew Lee, who's working on the structure of experience. And this option is that experience is structured all the way down, like claimed by IIT, but we can only introspect so far. And in particular for pain, I think we have some evidence that even though pain feels sometimes just unstructured, just pain is just pain, sometimes you can actually have conditions like pain asymbolia, where the unpleasantness dimension of pain comes apart for the actual sensory experience of pain. So you can have exactly the same sensory experience without the unpleasantness. So this can tell you that maybe there is some structure hidden in pain that usually you're not able to introspect unless it diverges or it gets dissociated. And for color, maybe we can even design some experiments to actually go inside the clicks and stimulate only some parts that you are not usually able to stimulate with our endogenous capacity of introspect, right? And then we can actually show that there are dimensions that can vary, and this can be noticed in phenomenology. So it is very speculative, but we're very curious to see whether this account holds or not. Thanks for the question.
Following this comment, a lot of trouble with structure. Hello? Hello? So, because we are using that word is not that respect. But what about like ambulances? Almost very dominant in its composition of like things that you cannot structure rebounds, just like eating. So how is that? How do you make sense in that theory of yours?
Thank you. That's a great question. Okay, I'll show this picture. It is a little weird and daunting, and it's about time, but this allows me to explain maybe what IIT says, right? Okay, so look at this dimension here. This is, let's imagine this is the arrow of time in physical time. So there's a lot of, moments that go by, and at every moment in the horizontal sort of axis, you're having one experience.
Okay, so wait, so time for you is a line.
So I'm imagining that time is a line, and at every moment, well, let's say just in the universe, like time flows. Okay, let's say, and at every moment, yeah. But the idea of IIT is that you're having an experiencing right now, right? And this experience is a structure, and all the content, whatever happened seconds ago, is actually still in your experience right now. So, for instance, if I've heard a tone like this blue tone here 200 milliseconds ago, right now that blue tone is still in my experience, but it's sort of receded towards the past. And I can experience the interaction of something that happened later, right now, with something that happened just a little, like, I don't know, a couple of seconds ago, right? And I think the dynamics of experience might feel like adds complexity, but I don't think there's any reason to think that this implies that experience is dynamical and needs processes in time, right? The view of IT is that every moment of experience includes memories, includes retention of whatever happened in the past, and this all relates with what I'm experiencing right now. So the feeling of emotions that happened through time or memories of something that happened in the past are just present contents of experience that interact with each other. I don't know if this satisfies your question.
So how do we make
What do you mean by ambience and so on?
it's not ambiance, it's not visual present, and it makes up for how you're feeling at that time. So how can you structure that in your thought?
I see.
Yeah, that was my key question. Sorry, I didn't ask it well.
Oh, no, sorry. I thought it was more about the dynamics in time, but I mean, being immersed in
Because we talk about structure and it's so static. And I'm saying structure, I'm an architect, so it's just like objects.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
makes, of course, we are in a physical world, but it also in a really dynamic that we are backing into something that we don't see.
Yeah.
And it makes it's constitute of your emotion, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree at all. Like every instant, experience changes very fast, right? If I am at a party, you know, there's a lot of stimuli, and I can go through a lot of emotions and changes in experience, and all this stays with me in every moment of experience. Having a soundscape is something that is just another content of experience, and I can have emotions based on the experience of something that has been going on around me for a while. Of course, you know, there's a specific feeling at the end of a movie that requires the entire movie to have been gone on, right? So, well, maybe we can talk more. I'm very curious about this question because it's kind of, there's something that doesn't work in my mind about that. So, thank you.
I have a question. Maybe it's a bit related to what Anya said, but you know, like some of the model, especially the stage or extendedness is maybe coming from the actual physical property, you know. So I just wonder, like, the dissociation between the Korean structure from the physical. For example, like when you take a psychedelic yourself, it disintegrates in a way. I don't know, I never imagined like this spatial extendedness actually decompose or be with a different way. And that then I can actually understand, okay, this is actually something in your brain that makes it some consciousness. Apart from it's just a dissociate the physical property of the space. Can I actually predict that something like that? Like in a way to be, you know, I always fascinated how our consciousness breaking down problem down in a certain way. So
do you mean dissociate from the physical properties of?
if everything this spatial extendedness is all depending on a physical property, there's no way to, you know, we see the space in a different way because it's property of the physics.
Well, the physical, you mean the world up there?
Or like you know,
or you mean the substrate of experience?
Yeah, I don't know. Physical means actual.
Oh, okay, no, that's absolutely not what I think says. Yeah, right.
I know, but the prediction is right. Maybe your conscious perception of space can be, you know, in a way to be destroyed if some of the noise.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But if it's more like just a special property, it's never happened. Like a continuity is actually.
I see. Yeah, no. I think, I mean, IIT actually predicts specific ways to intervene on the substrate of experience of space, like for instance, visual cortex, and predicts that your experience of space will change, will be destroyed, will be decomposed, will warp, all these kind of things are predicted. So it doesn't really matter the fact that the brain is extended in space, like space is a content of experience, it's very Kantian, very transcendental in this sense, right? That's how it is. And the same for time and objects and everything else. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Matteo.
Thank you.